Today I have the pleasure of chatting with Father Tadros Sharobeam, the first priest ordained from the Australian Copts living in Melbourne. Father Tadros is a senior cleric at St Mary's Coptic Orthodox Church in Kensington in Melbourne. Thank you, Abuna, for your time.
Thank you.
Abuna, could you please talk to us about how the church began? Tell us about how the early pioneers grouped themselves together and how they initiated a service in Melbourne.
I did not really live these events very much. I came in 1974, I stayed until 1977 in Adelaide. But I don't know, it was one of the things which I was entrusted with, a full books of old files. And it was given to me by Abuna Tadros Sharobeam. Or actually, it was given to Abuna Matthias, and Abuna Matthias gave it to me. And in this old books of files was a big treasure. Was all the old files since the start of the church in Melbourne, and even before that. And there was so many informations and so many things about how the first group has started here. One of the treasures which I had was the minutes book of the meetings of the first early committee of St. Mary Church here in Melbourne. And the book, I still have it here. It starts with, the first chapter is 1967 up to 1970. That's before Abuna Victor comes. There is about, I think about perhaps 10-15 meetings in this time, in this early time. And even it was brief, but it tells you what was going on in their mind and how they were thinking to have a church. They used to come all together and have something like a weekly meeting, a sort of a Bible study. By 1968, when Abuna Amin al-Amatallah arrived here in Australia, it was his first stop here in Melbourne.
That was the very first Mass ever conducted on Australian soil.
It was, I think it was 24th of January, 1968.
Yes.
That's more than 50 years ago.
Yes. Can I just ask you, Abuna, it is my understanding that some of these pioneers came on the boat together, or some of them knew each other or lived in the same boarding house. It's my understanding that early migrants couldn't rent a house, so they could rent in a boarding house because they didn't have a history.
At that time, they all used to come in boats.
Yeah.
But I don't think Abuna Amin al-Amatallah, some of the Copts came with him. I'm not sure of this. But I know many of those who came in boats, and they tell stories.
Yeah.
Amazingly, one of those who came in boats was Ambassador himself.
Yes.
Ambassador and his family came in boat.
Yes.
And he wrote briefly about his journey here to Australia.
Yes.
And how they, when they came in boat, I think they were received in one of these camps, migrant camps.
Yes.
And he tells amazing stories about these migrant camps where they had, and he had a photo with him, with his father holding him at that time.
Yes.
And then they moved to Sydney after that.
Yes.
But some moved to Sydney, some moved to Melbourne.
Yes.
I know some of those who came in boat was, I don't think your dad came in boat, I think he came in aeroplane.
No, we flew.
I know Kamil Suleiman.
Yes.
He died now, he passed away. And Kamil was one of those who came in boat, and he tells the story of how he's coming in boat. One of those who came in boat was also late Sabri Idris.
That's correct.
And Sabri Idris, when I remember when I visited him, for his son was studying in Monash University Engineering, where I was teaching. And this made a good friendship with him, and used to go and visit him with my wife in his house in Carlton. And he was so proud to show me the house and tell me, look, all this furniture came on the boat with us from Egypt. This is our sitting room in Cairo.
Yes.
And we brought it us with here in Melbourne. I remember Sabri Idrisi, one of those early ones, and you will hear a lot about him in these early stories.
Yes.
For he was one of those who speaks English very well. And so he used to translate, he used to attend the meetings with all the old groups like Naguib Basili and Khalil. Khalil was a young man at the time. He was
and
just
I
a
think
very young
Mr.
man.
Idris played a bit of a leadership role because he was perhaps the oldest one that has already had a family and children. So they all looked up to him. But tell us something, Abuna. It is my understanding that they used to come together. I think Mr. Alfonsif had a shortwave radio. I'll turn it up so the others can hear.
That's right.
But they were still worshipping in a variety of places.
They started, I think, in some of the churches available at that time. One of them was the All Saints in Carlton.
And was there an Antioch church that they
And there was also St. Nicholas Church in, I think it's in North Melbourne, something like that, in Victoria Street.
Yes.
That's where also, and that's I think where the first Mass was done. I think something like that.
There was some incident that happened that propelled this move to establish a committee. Can you speak to us about it?
There's few things. One of them was the death of one of the young people in their group. And this young man was traveling to Sydney, I think maybe to spend a holiday. An accident happened and he died. And they brought him back to Melbourne, and there was no church. So they had to do the service somewhere in the All Nations Church in Carlton. And this was quite an event for all of them. They felt, well, here we are. That was the first death in this small group. And they need a place to pray. And there's even, they had to ask some of the priests of other churches to come. One who used to help very much at that time was Holy Bolus. Holy Bolus was a Catholic Lebanese priest, Maronite, but this man was amazing. He loved our people, and he served so many. He used to bring them jobs, he used to visit them, he is one of those who has done a lot for our community, and we should remember that. And
we have some photos, we will upload photos of
he was in the port to receive Abuna Mina Na'matallah when he came. He was one of these few groups who come in this beautiful picture receiving Abuna Mina Na'matallah in Port Melbourne in 1968. And he has helped the new growing church in so much effort. He never had this idea to grab people to his church now. He was actually encouraging them to have their own church. The early group also, they started to feel the need to have their own church, to have their own services. In the beginning, they used to go to this Antiochian Orthodox church, and there was a priest there, his name is Father Malatius. I remember many of them who came to Melbourne early in 1967, 1968, was recommended by his Grace Bishop of good memory, Bishop Samuel, at that time, that if they cannot find a Coptic church, they can go to an Orthodox church. And the closest to us, one which still speaks Arabic, was the Antiochian Orthodox, which we call it Rome Orthodox, or Greek Orthodox. And so when they came, they actually started, when they needed a service, a marriage, or a baptism, they used to go to Father Malatius. And amazingly, this man also has done a great work for the church. Some of the pioneer people have been married there. Yeah, if you remember, Wagih Aziz was married with them. So, and many of our kids were baptized there in this Antiochian Orthodox church, which is it's still now at St. Nicholas at Victoria Parade.
So you think the passing away of this young man was the catalyst? It
was definitely a very important event. Not only this one. I think there was also the priest in the church they used to go every Sunday. He wants to get them to participate in the church and start to take part into the service itself, even having communion in his church. They used to, after the service, they used to go and sit in one of the houses. Mostly was Naguib Basili or Mikhail Ramzi or one of this group, actually. They used to go and sit. I remember one day Khalil was very upset and he had to leave, and then Sabri Idris followed him, and Naguib Basili followed him, and at that day they all came together to sit and say, we cannot continue like this. We need our church. We need our own church. And that was, I think this was late 1968. For the event of this death of this young man was October 1967.
Yeah, I think it polarized.
It started to come out together. They started to feel they are strange in any church they go. Even when they go to the Rome Orthodox Church, even it looks like an Orthodox church, like a service similar to ours. Even they speak Arabic and preach in Arabic, but still you feel strange.
There's a loss of identity.
Yeah, and they were so afraid of losing their identity.
Yeah. In speaking to some of the pioneers, I learned that Mr. Alphonse Seif, when he came to Australia, he packed his Tonya in his bag.
That's right.
Why are you doing this? There's no church, there's nothing. So, you know, what prompted you to pack your Tonya and your Agbeya and your hymn book?
After this event, when they started to feel not comfortable in this church they go to, they started to think, why we don't have our own church? And so they went and they hired a church, I'm not sure in Coptic or where, in South Melbourne at that time.
Yeah, I think it was Coptic.
Yeah, and they started to go they said, we're going to do our own service. And they used to go there and do all the hymns of the liturgy. And of course, here we are, Alphonse started to come playing the daf, and they started to wear the tonias, and they started to get the atmosphere of the church. They started to have a sermon. And amazingly, some of them were so good. Some like Aid, like Alphonse, like Maurice Farag when he came from Sydney. They started to even give sermons. It's amazingly how those people will had a bit of treasure. And they start to have treasures, all the treasures, and they started to come and talk.
And there was some heavy lobbying too. They were constantly writing Amba Samuel, Aizin Assis, Aizin Assis, Aizin Assis, and
there was a good reason for that. For at that time, Amba Samuel was actually working hard to send priests to the lands of migration, and he succeeded. I think by 1966, 1967 was the first Coptic priest to go to Canada.
Was Canada first or the UK?
I think I'm not sure about Europe, but I know the one who went to Canada, and I met him later on. He passed, he departed, and there was also another one in I'm not sure New Jersey or Los Angeles, but later on, and even still in the 60s, some priests started to go and serve in America and Canada, and so it was quite convenient to have another one in Melbourne. So even before the end of the 60s, there was at least 3 major churches established outside Egypt in the land of migration. And I know there was some churches in Arabic countries, but it was only to serve in a temporary way. Priests used to go and come back for Libya, like Amba Bakhamis used to go there when he was a monk. And also in Kuwait and all these places, but to go to these faraway places was something new. And of course, the pressure of the new wave of migration, which happened especially in the early 60s and more after 1967. There is 2 big waves of migration. One happened in the early 60s as a result of nationalizing all the companies, the foreign companies in Egypt, which many of them were employing Copts. One of those people whom perhaps you know very well, Dr. Gate. And he had a very good job in Egypt. And in 1966 he had to leave.
And the family that went to Perth?
There was some...
that was in 1957, so I think he saw the writing on the wall. Packed his family up and came before the nationalisation.
Dr. Gate, he had a history too. I sat with him and he gave me quite a big idea what was happening. And when he talks about it, he talks with passion.
Yes.
He almost sometimes cries when he talks about these early times.
Yes.
For when he came here, there was only not many Copts at the time. One of those came very early here, somebody who still lives in Melbourne. His name is Adib. عارفة أديب اللي هو جوز منى أديب.
Yes.
And he's still around, and he's still a good memory. He came 1966 or 1965. And also at that time came somebody else who was late Farag. If you remember late Farag, he came at this very, very early. They used to meet each other suddenly by chance in a shopping center.
Yes.
For they never know where are the others.
There was no shopping center in those times, yes.
Milk bars and somewhere, or Victoria Market.
Yes.
That's where they used to, suddenly they just, you hear somebody speaking Arabic.
They had the antennas.
Who is that? Speaking Arabic. Their ears just picks up the language.
Yes.
Who are you? Are you here? What are you doing here? Where do you live? And that's how they started to collect themselves and collected the first group.
Yes.
Later on, they started to have their own meetings, their own Bible study, and they used to sit and they do everything in the Mass except the sacraments.
Yes.
Everything, even reading the normal Sunday readings, they all read it. Somebody stands and says some contemplation about it, and then they say like a tamgid, and they say some hymns, and they pray and they go. They did that every Sunday.
And Father Victor, when he was actually traveling, he was coming as a migrant.
That's right.
And when
That's
he
true.
went to get the blessings of the Pope, Pope Carolus decided to ordain him, and he only had 40 days left on his visa.
That's right.
Which was just enough time for him to do the rites before he comes here.
Yes, but you know he's a relative of Abuna Na'matal. And so he was coming and he knows...
Who's a relative?
I think he was a relative.
Abuna Victor to Abuna Na'matal? It's not, I don't have that information. And Abuna Na'matal was related to Father...
Or to Pope Carolus.
Yes.
But I know they knew each other from Alexandria.
Yes, because so they served in the same region.
They served in the same region. It might not be relatives, but they know each other. So he is coming here and he knows that Abuna Na'matal is here.
Yes.
So, but I think when he went to ask Pope Carolus to pray for him, he said to him, "You're gonna stay. Yes. We need you."
And in fact, he gave him his own liturgical vestments.
That's right.
So when Father Victor arrived in Melbourne, he arrived with Pope Carolus's liturgical vestments. But before Father Victor started service in Melbourne, Abuna Mina Na'matallah visited on a monthly basis to do the sacraments.
That's right.
Marriage.
He used to come once a month to do the main things. He does the liturgy. And if any baptism or weddings, and we have few pictures of his early baptisms, which done by him in 1968, 1969.
Which is quite an arduous task for a young priest coming to a new country to serve in one state and then another, have the responsibility of the other state.
It was quite enormous. It was quite an enormous task to do all of this. But also this might be mentioned here, that when Father Victor was ordained, it was in the last days of Pope Carolus.
Well, he attended his
funeral. He attended his funeral.
He was the last priest that Pope Carolus ordained.
He was carrying the coffin.
Yes.
And he was supposed to travel to Australia, but he postponed his travel until the 40th day. Yes. That's why he was ordained in March. He came here late in April, 1971. And that's how it all started here. It started in Melbourne at that time. The part of the story which I know very well, how it started outside Melbourne, in Adelaide, and in Perth later on. And then this has started to grow and become established churches in both of them. I served it later on when I became a priest. I served in Adelaide. I used to go to Perth. I used to go around these areas. There was no other priest to serve these areas at that time.
Thank you very much for your tireless service. 24 hours every day for the last few decades. May you have many more to come. We really greatly value the time you've given us today.
Thank you very much for all this wonderful time.
Thank you.